بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. رب يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين يا فتاح يا فتاح يا فتاح اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. طيب, as I was saying before, the thing with the Munqidh is it's written at the end of Imam al-Ghazali's life. That makes it really important. Like Ayyuha al-Walad, one of the reasons why Ayyuha al-Walad is so important is because it's advice that he's giving to his disciple, and you can equally say to his younger self at the end of his age. And this is no different in the Munqidh, except in Ayyuha al-Walad, he's giving almost life advice. Don't be argumentative, for example. Don't be overly polemical. Don't be overly zealous. You're spending all of these days and nights memorizing every single item of knowledge, but where is your soul? That's like, it's really broad advice. It's very tasawwuf oriented. The Munqidh is the same, except in terms of intellectual pursuit. So it's really, really sound advice. That's why the Munqidh is important. So it was to really, for people to kind of think about this, more clearly, about how you should look at knowledge, particularly of truth and the pursuit of truth. طيب? So I think with that, let me give a small introduction. What I'll do here is I will give a loop of everything that would be covered, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So a synopsis before we go through it in a little bit more detail. Again, as I'm saying, jump in at any point, have a conversation, put your thoughts forward. Ahlan bikum. There's a few papers actually, that I can send you if you like, that argue that this is um, a Cartesian type of skepticism. That this is a precursor to Descartes. That Descartes' journey and Ghazali's journey are the same. And then there's responses to that. So you'll see some of those responses to that. Osman Bakr, for example, another, I think her name is Aisha Batoon, a Turkish scholar. She responds to that. And so there's a Dr. Sami on one side who's arguing some things, and this whole to and fro. This became a little area of debate. From it, the whole idea of Fitrah, that came out as well, where there was a sort of Salafi, I think he is, who said that this is Ghazali's denial of Fitrah, and then you had like Muhammad Gilan who responded to that, and so there's been so much controversy surrounding this book, and the truth of the matter is that everyone in some aspect is right from one perspective, because it's actually quite ambiguous when Ghazali is speaking. However, the sort of putting to rest as best as you can in some of these issues is probably done by the names that I mentioned, and also Frank Griffel. Frank Griffel has a fantastic paper. As you know, Frank Griffel he's dedicated a good portion of his academic career to al-Ghazali. He's the one that wrote the famous book on Ghazali's philosophy. He doesn't believe Ghazali is an Ash'ari. He has all of these tafarrudat, his sort of own positions on this, right? But he has a great paper on the concept of fitrah. I can send you all of the stuff afterwards. So this has been in the debate for a long time. But essentially, where I'm going to explain a little bit about Descartes and a little bit about al-Ghazali, and then you can make your own decision, and then we'll read from the meditations, or ahlan. So we can read, mashallah, طلع البدر علينا. So we can read from the meditations a little bit, not too much. You can read that in your own time. All you have to do is read the first meditation. It's about 3 pages, 4 pages. And he's a great writer, Descartes. So that would be an enjoyable read. And then it's 1 to 17 for the Munqidh. So the style of these sessions is going to be, the reading is done beforehand, and any additional material, I'll send it. If you guys want to share something, put it on the group, and we can have a read of it, and then we'll come together and we'll have a conversation. So if I give a little look before I go through a few finer points of the slides, and then we read the text, a little bit from the text. First and foremost, is Ghazali a skeptic? With the C, because I'm British. Is he a skeptic? Right? Yes, he's a skeptic. Right? He's a skeptic. Now, you may say, Astaghfirullah, يعني كيف يشك الإمام? طيب? And it's easier for me to, if I was to say this in Arabic, which is لا يشك في الإيمان, but his shak is في طريقة حصول علم بالإيمان, right? His issue is in methodology. So he says from the outset, I never denied God, nor the Shahada. Uh, so in utterance, he says, I never disbelieved in the Day of Judgment. But it's a bit like, if I could give you an analogy, imagine a man has a car crash, and he, in 1 minute he's in the car, and the next minute he's in a hospital. And he wakes up and he looks around, he knows that he's in a hospital, but he doesn't know how he got there. Right? And so he knows where he is. So for the Imam, he didn't deny God. Now, obviously, somebody could say that you definitely don't write everything that you're experiencing. And so if I was to write a journal, for example, that I know is going to be given to somebody else because I'm writing it for somebody else, I may not say everything. So the extent to which this affected Imam al-Ghazali, only he knows and only his Lord knows, right? That's going to be difficult for anybody else to truly know. But that, by the way, in and of itself is quite inspiring. Why? Because what you straight away immediately take from that is, despite such a dark moment in his life, Imam al-Ghazali is proving to you that you could come out on the other side. That's one thing. So I don't look at that as a hapless moment, but I look at it as a hopeful moment. Right? It's not a hopeless moment, but it's a hopeful moment. It's a happy moment. Right? That's one thing. The second thing is that he begins by saying he was disgusted by sectarianism, and that he knew that the Holy Prophet ﷺ had foretold us that we were going to break into these sects. And he hated sectarianism. Why? Because he looked at all of it as what he calls taqlidat, that these are just inherited beliefs, that this is the football team that my father supported, and therefore I'm going to support it. Most people that support a football team, it's because that's what my dad supported, or my older brother supported, or my mahalla supported, or my friend supported. It's very rare that somebody grows up and says, I think it happens, but it's rare. Al-Ghazali says something really key, and you'll remember this as you were reading it. He uses the word fitrah. I'm going to talk about the word fitrah in a minute. Fitrah, he uses twice. I really, really recommend that you read Frank Griffel on this, right? But he uses it twice. The first time that he uses it, it's just in the meaning of hilqa. And what he's based, and he translates it as talent. It's a great translation for this. Because there are some people, I remember a friend who, he grew up in madrasa and all of that, right? Very beautiful brother, very mukhlis, sincere, right? But for him, the edifice that he had built around himself, which is that these are the mashayikh, these are the a'imma, these are the holy people around me, and they can do no wrong. Yeah? And because he's from the subcontinent, meaning ethnically, he was a huge fan of Iqbal, because all of his mashayikh loved Iqbal and everybody. And then, unfortunately, he read the Reconstruction. And when he did that, he had a breakdown. When I mean a breakdown, I don't say this comically at all. He genuinely had a breakdown to the point where it affected him. That how can such a great Imam have not been a staunch Ash'ari? Because he wasn't, of course. In fact, he dedicated, I think, in chapter 3 or 4, entirely to the rejection of the Kalam arguments, because he's a complete Sufi in that sense and a proponent of Fitrah. So he has his own way, very, very similar to Ghazali, right? But al-Ghazali is more, he has more i'tidal in his text. You could argue that for Iqbal as well, but this is not about Iqbal, right? That's a different lesson. But he did. Why? Because for him, the groupism was more important than truth. And that truth, that edifice was very, very restricted. Ghazali hated this. Ghazālī despised this. In fact, Ghazālī says, and I quote from the Munqidh, Ghazālī says that knowledge that you have must be so certain that even if you saw somebody performing a miracle, it wouldn't change your position. Like Imam Ali, alayhi salam, when he said what? That even if he was to see what a miracle, it would not increase or decrease his iman, because he had that type of knowledge. So Ghazālī says, when you're going to use the word ilm, that's what we mean by it. That right there. So before he gets to that, he says, well, so the first question was, how do I know this knowledge? And so he doubts first and foremost his senses. And he gives two examples. One example that he gives is of movement, motion, and stillness. And you look at something, it doesn't look like it's moving, but then you come back an hour later and it's moved. The shadows moved, whatever it may be. The other example that he gives is, you look at a star. He says it looks like it's so small, but we know through geometry, it's actually huge. So he says that, can I trust my empirical data? Then he says, well, okay, so I'm in such doubt about my empirical data, but I've got my reason. I know that a whole is bigger than a part. I know that you cannot have two mutually exclusive things gathering together. I know these things. And then he says, and this is really interesting when you're going to read Descartes now, yeah? So just follow the trajectory along. He then says, but then my empiricism pipes up and says, well, you denied me because of your reason, which told you, well, it looks like it's not moving, but it is actually moving. It looks like it's small, but it's actually big. There was a higher judge, these are his words, a higher judge which has caused you to doubt me. But how do you not know that there's a higher judge above reason? Perhaps this is what the Sufis refer to as kashf. But he says, a higher reason that could make you doubt reason. How do you know that you could rely on your reason? That Ghazālī said I had no answer for. Now, juxtaposing this with Descartes, Descartes begins the meditation in exactly the same way. I had to rid myself of inherited beliefs. I had to rid myself of taqlid. And he said, but look what Descartes said. Descartes said, so I denied my empirical senses. Then I said, well, my reason is good. But check what he says here. Instead of saying that there's a higher reason, he used the word a demon. He said, perhaps there's a demon, a great demon, that actually is controlling your perception of your reason. And so you think 3 plus 5, this is his example, 3 plus 2 equals 5. But in fact, there's actually a demon that's made you think that. So even his reason. So if you look at the trajectory of both al-Ghazali and Descartes, it's actually very similar so far. Now, where the divergence, well, let's say they're even similar in a little bit more. Ghazali said, I never denied God. Descartes also says that I never denied God, that I believed God. Of course, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, that's fine. None of them, al-Ghazali, you can presuppose for Ghazali cogito ergo sum, because Ghazali at no point denies his own being conscious, of him being an observer. He doesn't deny that. So far, both of them are very similar. Both of them have now doubted their senses. They have doubted their reason. So empiricism and rationalism have gone to the side. Of course, al-Khabar al-Sadiq, testimony is even further, because testimony is completely reliant upon these two. Okay. When I have, even if it's Quran, or let's say a hadith mutawatir, what do we say? That when the companion heard it from the Prophet ﷺ, or it has to be hissi, sami'tu, ra'aytu. Why? Because the beginning of this chain has to be empirical. And then you have the jama'ah, min jama'ah, the sort of mass testimony, la tu'atum al-Kadhib, such that none of them could have conspired upon a lie. That's how you build a tawatur, right? So tawatur is, and that's rational. La tu'atum al-Kadhib is the rational part, and the hissi part is the empirical part. And of course, you heard it from the Jama'ah. How else did you get it? So the Khabar al-Sadiq is gone. So all of your epistemology now as Muslims has been thrown out the window. You just park it right over there. And you're beginning completely fresh. But neither disbelieves in God. The difference is this, though. So I had this debate or this conversation with somebody earlier today, right, about this, which is, oh no, but they're exactly the same. No, 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 no. Al-Ghazali does something that Descartes does not do. Descartes makes an assumption, and based off that assumption, builds his entire framework. His assumption, as he says in the second meditation, he mentions in the first meditation, but in the second meditation, Descartes says, God is good. If God were not good, he says, then maybe he could make me mistaken. Maybe he could make it that all of this is wrong, but God is good. That's an assumption. That's an assumption on the part of Descartes. And so his premise now, upon which he's gonna, or from which he's gonna build his argument, is entirely based upon an assumption. It's not based upon a first principle. It's not based upon any definitive knowledge. Al-Ghazali doesn't do that. Imam al-Ghazali says, I didn't disbelieve in God. And he says, but it was a nur, a light that God cast into my heart. And that made me once again rely, trust my empirical senses and my reason. But that nur, what does Ghazali say throughout the Munqidh, as we'll see as we're reading through it? He says that is the way of the Sufis. So he says, every sect and creed and Jama'ah I studied, I went to the depth, I mastered it. He goes, there was no difficult mas'ala except that I ended up in it. He says, this was my fitrah, his second use of the word fitrah, which is that this is the way Allah Ta'ala fashioned me. There's some people that are excellent followers. You tell them something, they accept it, they move on with their life. There's some people that just don't move past it. They can't. You can give them the best arguments in the world. Not until it makes sense to them on their terms, they will not move past it. That's just some people's tabak. That's their fitrah. So Ghazali says, this was my fitrah. I wasn't going to accept it. But the Sufis, he says, their knowledge is not attained through reason or empirical data. It's through experiential knowledge. There's a path. So I had to take the path. So where Descartes stops, makes an assumption, which is a problem with philosophy, and then builds his entire edifice based upon an assumption. That's a problem. Ghazali says, I'm not making an assumption. I'm saying you can have true knowledge, certain knowledge of God, and you can have it if you want. You can have it. You just have to take the path. For example, someone says to me, I want to learn about Descartes. Well, you're not going to just sit on your hands and learn Descartes, are you? You have to take a path. You have to take a course in philosophy. You have to read, his books. You have to read secondary sources about him. There is a path of analytical study that you have to undertake in order to understand Descartes or any other philosopher. Al-Ghazali is saying this is no different, except it's just not in books. It's not in books. It's not through using your mind. It's not through using your senses, but it is experiential knowledge. It's a nur that Allah puts. And he's not the first to say this, by the way. And Imam Malik, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi, what did he even say about hadith? He said, ليس بكثرة الرواية. العلم ليس بكثرة الرواية إنما العلم نور يجعل الله سبحانه وتعالى في قلب المؤمن. It's a nur that Allah places within the heart of a believer. طيب. So this is the roadmap. So where I say where Ghazali and Descartes diverge massively is that Ghazali actually gives you a way in getting out of this problem, whereas Descartes doesn't. He says, follow my assumption. Now, somebody could argue against that, but that's irrelevant at this point. So now, if I can just, I think I gave a decent enough look of this. So let me move on. All of this you know about al-Ghazali. طيب. Okay. So I mentioned this, the doubts about sense, perception, optical illusions, dream states, doubts about rationality. How do we trust logical first principles? To that point where the first intelligibles, even, he couldn't trust. I mean, this is skepticism on another level. طيب. So here, this is what I was talking about. I'll show it to you in the text anyway. Al-Ghazali speaks of the higher judge, whilst Descartes spoke of the demon. Similar idea, just the wording is different. Then you got this idea of fitrah. Now, fitrah, can I just say, Al-Ghazali does not differ with the Ash'ari on fitrah, but he does enhance the understanding. And it's very unclear. The problem with fitrah is always going to be there was very, very few people in our history that really spoke about it. But if you survey, and again, I would urge you to read Frank Griffel, if you survey al-Ghazali in terms of whatever he wrote in the Ihya Ulumuddin, what he's written in the Munqidh, in the Mihak, and in the Mi'yar, his idea of fitrah, although likened to, let's say, Ibn Taymiyyah and then many of the Sufis afterwards, it's not the same. It's not the same. Otherwise, it would be better, by the way. This is, I'm saying this with no, I'm not saying this strongly. Just an idea that I'm putting out there that if you remember for a minute, I don't know who's in the Sharh al-Aqaid classes, right? But when we talked about in the Sharh al-Aqaid, we talked about Asbab al-Ilm. We said that the ulama differed on aql. Yeah. So they said that the three means to knowledge are the aql, the hawas, the five senses, and testimony, al-khabar al-sadiq, true testimony. But the actual perception, the CPU, the computation that these peripherals are bringing in, that data that's being pulled in by this keyboard and mouse and right, it's the aql and hawas, etc. That computation is called the mudrika, which is the nafs. Which is the nafs. It would be closer. Again, I'm just saying this is maybe somewhere for someone to look into. But the fitrah would be better as a comparison to the nafs mudrika. The nafs mudrika. So that computation. Now, if I can give another analogy, forgive me for these analogies, but people's CPUs are different. Like an Apple machine is different to a non-Apple machine, for example, right? You know, the internal makeup of a Huawei phone and the Apple phone and a Samsung phone, although they're very similar, they're different. They have one thing, all of them have one thing in common, which is communication, right? Follow my analogy for a second, right? Just indulge me for a moment. Their fitrah, their khilqah, their ghariza, all of these words that Ghazali uses, right, is overlapping in at least one thing, let's say for now, which is that they are devices of communication. They all do that. But then they differ in other aspects. Some are stronger, some can do more. An Android can achieve a lot more than Apple, but an Apple is safer than Android, whatever, right? So they differ in their khilqah, but then they overlap in their khilqah. Imam al-Ghazali says that the human is exactly the same. That Allah predisposed within them, deposited within them, this khilqah. And they all overlap in what? Ala fitrat al-Islam, as the Prophet taught us to say, right? اللهم إني أصبحت على فطرة الإسلام وعلى كلمة الإخلاص وعلى دين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. على فطرة الإسلام. What does that mean? Is Islam the fitrah? What does that mean? So hadith is used in the context of fitrah. وَقَالُوا كُونُوا هُودًا وَالنَّصَارَى أَوْ تَهْتَدُوا. That they say, be Jew or Christian, you'll be guided. قُلْ إِنْ بَلْ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا. Say to them, no, we're upon the millah, the people of Abraham, Hanif, upright, Hunafa. linked to fitrah. So the khilqa that overlaps between every human being is that they are naturally, their primordial state is one of submission, one of adoring, one of being grateful. And we know this, and the truth of that matter is evident when somebody's about to die. When someone's about to die, or they're lost in a ship or a plane, when a plane's about to fall, it's very rare at that point that they think, well, I'm not going to remember this in a few minutes anyway. Like, that would be not bad, right? If you believed that when you're going to die, that you're just going to go off into nothingness the way you sleep, and you're not going to remember any of this. If you were naturally disposed to be able to do that, if that was your primordial state to do that, to be honest, you wouldn't really be unhappy about dying. You really wouldn't be unhappy about dying, because I'm not going to remember it. Okay, yeah, I wish if I done a few more things, that bucket list that I had, I done a few more things in that bucket list. But ultimately, who cares? The reason why people start really calling upon God is because deep down, they don't know where they're going, because they do believe that there is a place to which they are going. They believe, they truly believe in that. And that comes out in those dire moments. So the fitrah is not, if you're going to liken it, I'm saying, then you're better off likening it to the nafs mudrika, not to the aql. The aql is a peripheral. The fitrah is the khilqa. So now, imagine I've got a Mac. The Mac has it has a mouse the way it is, it has a keyboard the way, whatever it may be. So my aql is there, my hawas are there, but the way I'm going to use those is going to be based upon my khilqa. I used to work with a guy, non-Muslim, and I don't know, I just, spoke about Islam and things like that. And I remember he was a Christian, right? And so I was saying to him, but what about this? And what about this? And what about this? What about this? And he said to me, you know what? I'm just an atheist. And I said, okay, great. Right? Now you've unlearned something. Let's move on from here. Let's talk about that. And he just stopped me. And he was like, look, I'm just never gonna believe. I ain't got time, his words. I don't have time. That's a khilqa. That's a khilqa. He knows that there's a God out there, but he doesn't want to use his peripherals to bring in that kind of data. So fitrah is not like what Ibn Taymiyyah was saying. For Ibn Taymiyyah, fitrah is the sole way to know God. Ghazālī isn't saying that. But the Ghazālī is saying, check this out. He says, Allah cast a light into my heart that restored my dependency upon empirical data and upon reason. I once again trusted both the syllogism and the premises based upon observable data that make up that syllogism. So the absolute knowledge that they are actually good and valid tools of knowledge, that's different to what Ibn Taymiyyah is saying. That's different. So Ghazālī is not saying, and the other thing, that's one difference. Where's the other difference? The other difference is that the fitrah is not the place in which there is the arad, the accident of knowledge. No. The fitrah is just the machine itself. Is that good? Okay, so now, let me just finish these slides, and then we'll do some reading. So we talked about this. He wanted to break all of these inherited beliefs. He didn't believe a seeker. He was disgusted by it. If you've read 1 to 17, his language is very harsh. No teachers, no books, no tradition, no nothing, right? So for him, ilm, haqiqi ilm is dhawqi. It's experiential. And wallahi, look, we can say this as perhaps, I said I wasn't going to, argue the case for anybody. I was just going to present the ideas. But I think, for most people, if you asked a typical Muslim, a Sunni Muslim anyway, they probably found their faith, whilst listening to a qasida in madh of the Prophet ﷺ. Truth be told, right? Truth be told, for most people, they found their iman in something so beautiful that they learned about the Prophet ﷺ, and that was the Iman, So, and that's a type of experiential knowledge. Without getting into the whole, because even the let's say the Muslim claim to love of Allah and the Messenger والسلام, is something which unanimously is agreed upon by scholars. That is ata'i, it's ladunni. Allah Ta'ala grants love. I always marvel at Orientalist scholars, Western academics within the academy, who have spent a lifetime studying the Islamic tradition, like great, like Sufis, like masters of the tradition, like people of dhawq, people of absolute, like, just huge characters, and they were never moved towards accepting Islam. Of course, you have closet Muslims, but they weren't moved to it. It really is a divine gift. So Ghazali's disillusionment with dialectics and the people of munadara and jadal. So for him, he was like, it's not about an argument. I sought truth, not triumph in debate. What a statement by Imam al-Ghazali, right? And then he goes on and he says, and this is going to come in the next lines, in the next session, where he says, well, so I thought there's 5 groups that he categorizes all thinking human beings into. Like, he's not talking about a layperson, but all thinking and ahlul fikr of the Islamiyin, the people of nisbah to Islam, even if they're not Muslim. They're 5. The philosophers, the theologians, the mystics, sorry, I think I've missed off somebody. But he says the Batinians, sorry. I think the mystics comes into that, but I think I made a mistake there. So the Batinians, the hukama, the philosophers, the mutakallimun, the Sufis. These are 4 groups. And he says that, so I said, I'm going to have to master these groups. And he went through every single one until he, spoiler alert, finds the truth with the Sufis. Because he says that they're the only ones, and as he says, and I quote, for you to deny their epistemology is to restrict the mercy of God. That's what he says, which is unique. Okay, let me just move through this quickly. Concluding reflection, Ghazali's crisis is not medieval, it is existential. And do you know why this is important as well? It's because you do have many people out there who you may not even consider, but they have questions, and they have sometimes even doubt. And some people are willing to think about these things. Look, the truth of the matter is, even the great mufakkir from Islam will always work off of the assumption that Islam is true, right? They'll always work off that assumption. And then they'll do their fiqh. Because nobody would dare to go as deep as they possibly could to think about even their own senses and whether they can trust them. You know where people have got into this as well, by the way, just as a small tangent, yet related, is Ghazali, when he wants to deny, by the way, empiricism again, he says, well, what about in a dream? All right, cause and effect. You can't have a world without cause and effect, right? Where's the cause and effect in your dream? Where is it? There's no cause and effect in dreams. Right? Descartes has a great response to this, by the way, because Descartes says, even in your imaginary world, it's still related to something in reality. He says, even if you were to make, and he uses the example of sirens and satyrs, the mythical beasts and the sirens in the ocean, these mythical creatures. And he says, even then, they've got like part animal, they're part fish, they're part human. You're still making them from parts of things that you already know. So he's saying that's still a proof. But then he says, even if you were to make something so novel, that's a quote, so novel, Descartes says, he says, even then it's just a mix-up of something that you already had. However, so al-Ghazali says, okay, let's say that's fine. There's reality, there's, a'yan thabita, right? There's something out there, no problem. But how do you know? Because when you're in a dream and you wake up and you're really like shook up, you believed that was reality. And it was indeed a reality of sorts, right? But it wasn't this reality, whatever this is. Okay, the dream is real, right? There's no denying that. Nobody can deny that the dream is real. But you wake up and say, it's only a dream, it's not real. What was the difference between that and this? What is that? You know when I say that this pen is different to this cover, I have to be able to define this and define that. So let's say the dream is different to this. What is that? You can't even deny, you can't even define it. And now, with all of this sort of, the idea that perhaps we're just, in the matrix, we're just in a computer simulation where the Sims, yeah, remember you used to play the Sims when you were young? Like, haha, the joke's on you. You're in the Sims, Yeah, you're in the Truman Show. It's you. Like, oh, Big Brother, you're in Big Brother. You just don't know it. It's that. So how do you know that? How do you know that there's no way you can know. Not really, if you think about it. There's no way you can distinguish it. So this is what al-Ghazali is saying. He's saying, well, what do you rely on? Because in your dream, you could have jumped up in the air, right? And you could have felt the feeling. You could have even felt the pain in your dream. You definitely felt all the emotions. Where were those emotions? What was happening? So, like I said, Descartes actually gives a good response, which is Descartes actually comes to the point where he even says, well, even if you can't, let's say you've made up this mythical figure, at least the colors you're using, you're not making up new colors. Has anybody made up a color in their dream? But then you fast forward to Russell, back to Russell, who says, well, okay, if I was to say to you, what color is this? You'd say, what would you say? Sorry.
And do you want us to speak?
Yeah, this is like, go for it. So I'm talking too
Okay.
much.
Do you want to speak in terms of physics or just what I'm seeing right now?
No. What color is this?
Oh, black. I
Black,
think it
right?
was black. Okay.
All right. So yeah, Sidi Yaqub will say black. Sidi Abid will say black. But how do I know that what you mean by black isn't what I mean by purple? Like what I'm perceiving when I see purple, how do I know that that's not what you're perceiving when you call it black? And every time you see it, that's the color. And every time I see it's purple. How can you verify it? You can say, but this is just dumb. This is silly. Okay, but how do you verify it?
Is it
Because
like that dress thingy, blue or purple dress that went viral a few years ago in the internet?
yep, exactly. Some
Yeah.
people look at it and they see blue, and some people look at it and they say, yeah, okay, shared experience. But I'm saying, Kibla, even
Y-
the shared experience here,
You also have colorblind people.
you do. But I'm saying, let's say we all call this black. How do I know that when I look at it, what I mean by black is exactly what you mean by black? How do I know that? How do I not know that every time you see this color, it's actually what I look at and see purple, but you look at it and call it black every time? And you've got 1/4 of the population that look at it and they see purple, but they call it black. One quarter look at it and they see red, they call it black. How do you know? Because the only way you can know is if you can get out of this and observe it. But you can't. So al-Ghazali says that he got to that stage. I don't know if I'm dreaming, he says. What if this is actually a dream, a simulation? I'm in a computer game. This whole AI thing now, they're talking about consciousness and uploading it and putting it into a robot and stuff like that, etc. Right? What if there is a your consciousness, you're just, cogito ergo sum, you're just a consciousness within this broad consciousness. Well, from a Sufi perspective, that is what you are, right? Because you're just sort of there's wahdatul wujud, right? So, but like the idea is, how do you know that? Now, for most people, this is what Ghazali is saying, is that their khilqah, by God's grace, is that they don't really want to ask the question and they're not interested. It doesn't change their life. So many people, if I speak to you about philosophy or kalam, they'll be like, this is just not interesting to me. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't even like talking about it. Fear Allah. And they will just walk away, right? And they're not interested in it. And you got some people, for example, that will love politics. They love all the controversial fiqh issues. They love all of it, all of whatever it is. Khuruj al-Imam, gender issues, whatever it may be. They love it. They're stuck in it. They can't get out of it. Khilqah. Khilqah. You got some people, they're like, all of you, like, leave me alone. I'm going to the Mawlid. And they just want to sit in the Mawlid all day long. And they're just reading Dalail all day long. Khilqah. You're naturally inclined, it's your CPU. You're inclined towards those ways. Right? But the Ghazali say, and Shaykh Hassan said something beautiful in that podcast. He said, in related to kalam. So when you say kalam, you mean by that primarily epistemology, even before you even get into ontology and cosmology, right? Epistemology is foundational. What did he say? He said something that was really, really, really good, really brilliant. He said, why the mutakallimun worked so hard is because you have to make this the higher science. You have to. You don't have a choice. Why? Because the entire underpinning, the foundations of the entire edifice of Islam is upon metaphysics. Right? Because if let's say you've got no morality, then what do you do? What do you do with the Sharia of the Prophet? Who cares about anything after that? So it's the highest science for a reason. Like, it's important. It's an important science. So it has to be robust. So Imam al-Ghazali has gotten to a stage where he's saying, yeah, but the only way that it can be, for him, he's saying this, that the only way it can be 100% undeniable, indubitable, to use the word that Descartes uses. There's no way of being duped. He says that is only through thought. It's through experiencing it. So I think it was Dr. Usman Bakr, in his paper, he highlights the fact that you have to read Ghazali in this context, in that Sufi framework of knowledge, because the aql stops at ilm al-yaqeen. Yeah, the aql stops there, right? The burhan has been established, right? The apodactic proof has been established. There's no denying the premises, the conclusion follows. This is that's ilm al-yaqeen. This is then the stage after that is of what? Of ayn al-yaqeen, of mushahada, where there's an actual experience. But that experience, once it takes an individual into wahda, where they are truly at home, in the home of homes, that's when they have haqqul yaqeen. That tahaqquq is what gives them the name of tahqiq. This is the school of tahqiq. When they say the school of tahqiq, what they mean is that they finished the hawashi and the sharh al-aqaid, they moved them to the side, and they said, okay, that's there. But there's a certain spiritual journey that the student must undertake. And if a student was to undertake that journey, and they were to give them the philosophical nomenclature, when you read, for example, the Sufis, you're just learning the istilahat of the Sufis. The path is entirely experiential. The books are helpful, but the path is experiential, is what they're saying. So that's when they traverse onto haqqul yaqeen, and that's a whole different. So Ghazali says, for that, and this is word for word, by the way, what Iqbal says in the reconstruction, word for word. In fact, Iqbal, unlike Ghazali, where Iqbal and Ghazali differ, by the way, is Ghazali says kalam is fruitful and beneficial, but in its own world, in its bubble, which is when dealing with the Mu'tazila, dealing with these, other mutakallimun, where your tools are all mutually accepted. They're musallam between you, all of you. And he goes, there it's important. It's important to do that there. He says, but absolute certainty in the higher sense. He says, none, not the hukama, not the mutakallimun, not the bataniya. Nobody can give you that. It's only the Sufis. This is what Ghazali is saying. Iqbal, however, where he diverges from Ghazali a little bit, is because Iqbal not only says that kalam is not fruitful, he spends an entire chapter trying to completely destroy the three main arguments of the Mutakallimun. The argument, the ontological argument, the cosmological argument, and the argument from contingency. He spends the whole chapter trying to destroy those arguments. Right? Whether he succeeds or doesn't succeed, that's for you to decide if you were to read it. I have my own opinion on that, but Iqbal was a great man, a great thinker. But anyway, the point that he's trying to make is that he is saying that these arguments, so he's almost anti-kalam. Whereas Ghazali is not anti-kalam. He finds it very, very important and useful, but not useful when it is trying to achieve haqqul yaqeen, because he says that that's not it's not a road that will take you there. So you can see where these guys, where they're all going off. Now let me do a few objections and responses, just very quickly. I won't take up too much time. Okay, so the first objection is that this is kufr, and we already dealt with this. So al-Munqidh was written after al-Ghazali's return to teaching in 499 after Hijri. The book has been compared to Augustine's Confessions and Descartes' Meditations. We're just going to read a little bit here. We're only going to read a few paragraphs, and you're going to be amazed, as if Descartes copied and pasted from the Munqidh, right?
Did we get this presentation in the group chat?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Osman Bakr.
So what we got is we got a PDF with 3 pages. That's what we got.
No, you didn't get the presentation. What you got was
a PDF, a Munqidh session 1.
Yeah, you got. I just gave you that. That was just for you.
Yeah,
I gave you this.
This one, yeah.
This was just me breaking down all of the major themes from the
sorry.
book. So that was that was just for you, basically. I'll send you the slides as well. But this is just for you to get an overview of what he's talking about. And if you haven't noticed this in whatever I've explained today, it's basically all of this is pretty much in it.
Okay.
But let me just I'll summarize the objections very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. So Osman Bakr says that al-Ghazali's doubt is neither in modern skepticism nor a proto-Cartesian method. Instead, it is a sincere inner crisis prompted by al-Ghazali's search for yaqeen. That's what I mean by he did not have shak in Iman, but he had shak in the tariq of husul of knowledge of Iman. How did you get there? You can find the paper. I don't know much about who he is, except that he wrote this paper and it was quite good. He made a good point. That was a contribution on his part, in my opinion.
So it's like Descartes' page 1, where he says we don't deny the existence of God.
He
line for line. So there's this acceptance that God exists. So no one's denying, let's say, God's existence, or let's say the very foundations of religion, let's say. So there's no kufr happening, let's say.
No. Okay. There's no kufr. There's no kufr. The idea is that the Ghazali knows. He's like somebody, as if he's like, somebody that's from a village that believes in everything in Islam but don't know how they believe in it. He says, I took myself to that stage. So I didn't have any doubt in Allah and the last day, but I wanted to know how I could establish that with absolute certainty. It's very, very nuanced, the point that he's making. So al-Ghazali's doubt was rooted in a deep desire to know things as they really are. Okay, but I'm going to skip over that. So while taqlid is valid for lay believers, seekers of truth must surpass it through critical inquiry and spiritual discipline. So he saw no contradiction between reason and intuition. Kashf. But I'm going to send you all of this. You can just read this afterwards. So Sami M. Najm critiques Imam al-Ghazali by suggesting that he was being polemical. So he actually says, so he is reading Ghazali from the days where he's refuting the Batiniyah, from the days that he's writing his Tahafut, from the days that he's writing his Ikhtisar, which are all polemical works because they're kalam works. So he's saying the Munqidh, it's not true. He's saying it's not true that al-Ghazali didn't go on this journey. He's being polemical. Yeah, that's what his argument is, right? So Zainab Batul Tashkin responds to this by highlighting that this was an autobiographical work and not a work of polemics. Ghazālī's skepticism was a sincere intellectual and spiritual crisis aimed at uncovering a more secure foundation for certainty beyond sense perception and rational reason. So another objection is the idea of, we talked about this, that he denies the Fitrah. Now, it is true. So the argument is this is a kind of Humean empiricism. Yeah. So for David Hume, his idea of tabula rasa was really important. Tabula rasa meaning a blank slate. Unlike Socrates, Socrates believed that humans were given innate knowledge. And so the Socratic method of learning, i'tirāz jawab, which is basically the Dars Nizami way of teaching, right? It is a way of recognizing that there's innate knowledge in people and then extracting it from them, getting them to think about it. So, but for Hume, he says that you're a blank slate because he was an empiricist. So he gives all precedence to empirical data. So he says you're a blank slate when you're born, and then through your experience, you're gathering that data, you're building in your code. Not exactly the same, but a little bit similar to Mullah Sadra. Mullah Sadra, his idea is that we also acquire knowledge onto like a kind of slate. I give the example of code. Mullah Sadra says that your being is made up of the items of knowledge that you take. So if I was to say something today that you did not previously know, that's gonna make up your makeup. So I give the example of what Mullah Sadra is trying to say, like code. Yeah, and Shadi's coder kind of computer person, right? So when you're writing code and you're making all of your software and doing all of the cool things that you do, right? When you add in that code, whether it's going to give you a bug, right, or whether it's going to make better your system, it's part of the system now, isn't it? You can't do away with it. It's not like, what do you guys do? You put it under like in brackets or hyphenate it and it goes blank, right? Where it's just like notes and it's not part of the code. I'm not talking about that. When you actually put it into the code, makes up the makeup. This is what Mullah Sadra's argument is. You are your knowledge. So he says the alim and the ma'lum are the same thing, right? They're one and the same thing, which is a very interesting perspective. But in any case, so for Hume, so Ghazālī actually uses this word as a blank slate. But what he doesn't mean by it, he means that knowledge, yes, you're empty of it, but not the fitrah. Hume doesn't accept the concept of fitrah. Ghazālī says you're already predeposited with the knowledge of God. By knowledge, you know what I mean. What I mean, that you're already inclined. Your khilqa is to go in that direction. The same way the penguins migrate every year in the same way. When the birds migrate, and that's not knowledge. Okay. Ilm is in the.
Sorry, Imam Sahib. Quick question. These terms that you're using, khilqa and mudrika, are these common terms between is this an Imam Ghazali specific term, or is this recognized as generic term amongst the scholars?
These are generic. Nafs, mudrika, these are kalam terms. In this book, Ghazali actually uses kalam terms. He doesn't always do that. In Ghazali's other works, for example, in his Mi'yar al-Ilm, he completely changes the taxonomy. In his al-Qistas al-Mustaqim, Ghazali changes the entire technical parlance of logic. What you call a shakl al-awwal al-thaniya, he gives different names. What you call a qadiyya, he gives a different name. Ghazali does that because he's brilliant, right? But here, now, these are all khilqa, these are all lughawi terms. But these are all terms used in Quran, all of them.
So they're not in the Ibtidai books, are they?
No.
Okay.
The Ibtidai books are just going to be what's a wajib, what's mumkin, what's mustahil, the hukm aqli, the hukm adi. These are like, like basic things, just getting a framework in someone's mind. Like, what's the theory of mind? No. This is, because you got to remember, look, the Munqidh, this is not, see, I'll tell you what the problem with the Munqidh is. Someone looks at it and they think, oh, it's a small little risala. No, this is a man's meditations that he is writing at the end of his life, and that man is Ghazali. I'm telling you, I only did it because I just wanted to give a short synopsis of the book. The Munqidh, you could spend a year, 2 years on the Munqidh, not because he is mentioning some very important concepts that look how many things we rushed through today. We're just rushing through these things. If you stopped and sat with them for a little while, he's a brilliant mind. He's a mufakkir, and and he's fantastic. So yeah. Okay, now let's go very quickly to the text. So here he says, let's just read a few paragraphs. So he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. He says, now then, you have asked me, my brother in religion, to communicate to you the aim and secrets of the sciences and the dangers. I'm going to skip some. He says from here, you want me to give you an account of my travail in disengaging the truth from amid the welter of the sects. I mean, even the translation into English, I mean, Montgomery it's pretty amazing. But al-Ghazali was a very, very baligh, fasih individual. Although Ghazali is very easy to read because he doesn't write mutun. As far as I know, none of the books of Ghazali are mutun in that sense. All of them they're kutub, like, books to be read. They're not really books that are studied. Even the Iqtisad, okay, we studied it. People studied the Iqtisad, and it is an amazing book, but it's a wordy book. Anyway. And he says, you also want to hear about my daring in mounting from the lowland of servile conformism to the highland of independent investigation. I mean, again, beautiful language. And first of all, even if you look at the Balagha here, he is linking conformism to lowland, to something, just awful and where the hyenas are hanging out. But when he wants to speak about independent investigation, he's speaking about a highland. He's speaking about the top of the mountain, right? Anyway, he says, and first of all, what profit I derive from the science of Kalam. Secondly, what I found loathsome among the methods of the devotees of Ta'aleem. Ta'aleem, if you read his Qistas, he's referring to the Shi'i Batinis, who restrict the attainment of truth to uncritical acceptance of the Imam's pronouncements. He hates taqleed with a passion. Thirdly, the method of philosophizing which I scouted, and finally what pleased me in the way pursued by the practice of Sufism. There's your 4 groups. Mutakallimun, Shi'i philosophers, the non-Shi'i philosophers like Avicenna, namely al-Farabi, al-Kindi, and the like. And the 4th are the Sufis, right? So he says, so I'm going to do this. Then he said, you should know, look at 4, you should first of all know, God give you good guidance and gently lead you to the truth, Ameen. But the diversity of men in religions and creeds, plus the disagreement of the community of Islam about doctrines, given the multiplicity, the multiplicity of sects and the divergency of methods, is a deep sea in which most men founder and from which few only are saved. Each group alleges that it is the one saved, and each faction is happy about its own beliefs. So he's like, well, everyone's just taking it for granted, right? Then he says, in the bloom of my youth and the prime of my life, from the time I reached puberty before I was 20 until now, when I am over 50. Remember this language, yeah, when you're going to look at Descartes. Now I'm 50, he says, but since I was a shab, I have constantly been diving daringly into the depths of this profound sea and wading into its deep water like a bold man, not like a cautious coward. I would penetrate far into every murky mystery, pounce upon every problem, and dash into every mazy difficulty. Beautiful language. But again, he's not being shy or humble. He's being dead honest. This is about truth. I would scrutinize the creed of every sect and seek to lay bare the secrets of each faction's teaching with the aim of discriminating between the proponent of truth and the advocate of error, and between the faithful follower of tradition and the heterodox innovator. I would never take leave of any interiorist, batini, without wanting to learn about his interiorism, or of a literalist without wanting to know the substance of his literalism, or a philosopher without seeking to become acquainted with the essence of his philosophy, or a mutakallim without endeavoring to discover the aim of his discussion and polemic, or a Sufi without eagerly trying to obtain knowledge of the secret of his serenity, or of a devout worshipper without looking into the source and substance of his piety, or of an irreligious nihilist without attempting to find out his background and motivation in order to become aware of the reasons for his bold profession of nihilism and irreligion. What a statement. Like, that is a paragraph that should be written in gold. You know, can you imagine what this would do just generally to the population of Muslims? He would break down everything they ever thought. They'd have to rethink everything for themselves. You know, imagine if Ghazālī was alive today and he was to say this. Imagine, would any group accept him? Oh, you've gone against our Imam, or you've gone against our Akabir, or you've gone against our Shaykh al-Islam, or you've gone against, you know. Ghazālī's like, I don't have time for that, you know. And then he says, here in this one, I'm going to leave it because of time. Here he goes into, let me just mention. So here he talks about the Fitrah. It was an instinctive, natural disposition placed in my makeup by God Most High, not something due to my own choosing or contriving. As a result, the fetters of servile conformism fell away from me. Sorry, Sidi? Oh, I thought you said something. So he says, we know the hadith where the Jews will turn their child into a Jew and the Christians into a Christian and the Muslims into a Muslim. He says, so I took nothing for granted. Then he said here, now if we come down to here, so read this, it's all wonderful, right? That this is where he says in this 7 that your inquiry into the true meaning of knowledge is that it should be so certain that if a person was to perform before you a miracle, it should not shake your belief. That's al-i'tiqādu al-jāzim for him. So then he said, okay, then I had to go to the foundations of knowledge and I had to begin with doubt. So he says, now listen to this now. I then scrutinized all my cognitions and found myself devoid of any knowledge, answering the previous description, except in the case of sense data. Now from here he starts to say, so I said, now that despair has befallen me, the only hope I have of acquiring an insight into obscure matters is to start from things that are perfectly clear, namely sense data and self-evident truths, empiricism, rationalism. Then he says, but what ended up happening is, I realized that I have to doubt them. With great earnestness, therefore, I began to reflect on my sense data to see if I could make myself doubt them. This protracted effort to induce doubt finally brought me to the point where my soul would not allow me to admit safety from error, even in the case of my sense data. So he says, I began to doubt them. Then he says, when I said to myself, my reliance on sense data has become untenable. Perhaps, therefore, I can rely only on those rational data, which belong to the category of primary truths, such as our asserting that 10 is more than 3, etc. He says, then sense data spoke up. What assurance have you that your reliance on rational data is not like your reliance on sense data? Indeed, you used to have confidence in me. Then the reason judge came along and gave me the lie. But were it not for the reason judge, you would still accept me as true. Because there may be beyond the perception of reason another judge. And if the latter revealed itself, it would give the lie to the judgment of reason, just as the reason judge revealed itself and gave the lie to the judgment of sense. The mere fact of the non-appearance of that further perception does not prove the impossibility of its existence. Which he later says. Then he starts to talk about the dream. Don't you see when you're asleep, you believe certain things? So he mentions those. Then he says, maybe that higher reasoning is what the Sufis claim to be theirs, right? So he says, when all of these happened, right at the end, look what he said. Read 15. Amazing. When these thoughts occurred to me, they penetrated my soul. And so I tried to deal with that objection. However, my effort was unsuccessful, since the objection could be refuted only by proof. But the only way to put together a proof was to combine primary cognitions. So he looks at it as a dawr. So if, as in my case, these were inadmissible, it was impossible to construct the proof. If you need first principles, you need first intelligibles, right? You've all done logic, right? The premises of a syllogism have to be based upon first principles. They can't be themselves only. They have to be qat'i. I have to say A is bigger than B and B is bigger than C, therefore A is bigger than C, right? That has to be a first principle. You can't already move off something which is madhnoon, which if you look at the Razi in doubt, when it comes to tawatur, which I alluded to earlier on social media, you have to go to primary. So he says, this malady was mysterious and it lasted for nearly 2 months. During that time, I was a skeptic in fact, but not in utterance and doctrine. No. So he's explicit. So anyone that wants to say that is telling a huge lie on the Imam. I'm going to send you as well. I just left my tablet downstairs. Otherwise, I actually had broken this down in liquid text, each section and what the primary themes are. But I did type it up and send it to you anyway. But I'll try to take a screenshot of that and send it to you. Then he said, at length, God Most High cured me of that sickness. My soul regained its health and equilibrium. And once again, I accepted the self-evident data of reason and relied upon them with safety and certainty. Unlike Ibn Taymiyyah, who essentially rejects the validity of syllogistic reasoning, right? Who rejects the concept of kulliyat outright and says that the fitrah is the place in which there's knowledge. Al-Ghazali is not saying that. Al-Ghazali is not saying that at all. He's saying the fitrah is one thing. He is saying that Allah Ta'ala put a nur in my heart through which I once again trusted self-evident data of reason and I was able to depend upon my senses. He's saying something very different to Ibn Taymiyyah. But that was not achieved by constructing a proof or putting together an argument. On the contrary, it was the effect of a nur, which God Most High cast into my breast. And that light is the key to most knowledge. Now, and look at this. Therefore, whoever thinks that the unveiling of truth depends on precisely formulated proofs has indeed straightened the broad mercy of God. There you are. What do you do with that now? What do you do with that? You can go after a Shaykh al-Akbar, and you can go after a Suhrawardi, and you can go after the ulama of the Farangi Mahal, and you can say what you want. What do you do with Ghazālī? What do you do with that? What do you do with him? Then he says, the aim of this account is to emphasize that one should be most diligent in seeking the truth. Where he departs from Descartes is he gives you a way to get this. Unlike Descartes, seeking the truth until he finally comes to seeking the unseekable. For primary truths are unseekable because they are present in the mind. And when what is present is sought, it is lost and hides itself. That's the fitrah. You have to be like a baby. This is one of the biggest problems with even, sorry to tangent, this is one of the biggest problems even with performative Islam. The idea of performative Islam. This idea that religion is entirely the outward. And if the outward is not how we conceive of it, then your inward must be problematic. It's a big problem, And so when that happens, when you lose the beauty, the innocence, the simplicity of religion, the beauty of it, it is lost and hides itself. But one who seeks the unseekable cannot subsequently be accused of negligence in seeking what is seekable. So that is this entire, I don't know about you, but that's exhausting, actually, even just to go through this, because he has taken you on a whole journey of what he was going through. If you read that as a psychology, and imagine what he didn't write about what he was going through, right? Now, with all of those points in mind, just to read a little bit of the first meditation. So this is Descartes. So Descartes says in the first meditation, he says, in the first meditation, I expound the grounds on which we may doubt in general of all things, and especially of material objects, so long at least as we have no other foundations for the sciences than those we have hitherto possessed. Now, although the utility of a doubt so general may not be manifest at first sight, it is nevertheless of the greatest, since it delivers us from all prejudice and affords the easiest pathway by which the mind may withdraw itself from the senses and finally make it impossible for us to doubt wherever we afterward discover truth. Now, this is the first one. No, I want to get to the actual first 1 second. That's a synopsis. Here we are. He says, several years have now elapsed since I first became aware that I had accepted, even from my youth, many false opinions for true, and that consequently what I afterward based on such principles was highly doubtful. And from that time I was convinced of the necessity of undertaking once in my life to rid myself of all the opinions I had adopted, and of commencing anew the work of building from the foundation if I desired to establish a firm and abiding superstructure in the sciences. Exactly the same thing that Ghazālī says. It was all inherited belief. Then he says, and Ghazālī said, how old was he? 50. He said, but as this enterprise appeared to me to be one of great magnitude, I waited until I had attained an age so mature as to leave me no hope that at any stage of life more advanced, I should be better able to execute my design. Meaning he waited and I got as old as I could have got, where I've seen life in all of its fullness. I was doing wrong, where I still to consume in deliberation any of the time that now remains for action. Today, then, since I have opportunely freed myself from all cares and am happily disturbed by no passions, and since I am in the secure possession of leisure in a peaceable retirement, I will at length apply myself earnestly and freely to the general overthrow of all my former opinions. Almost exactly the same opening of both texts. Then he says in point 2, but to this end, it will not be necessary for me to show that the whole of these are false, a point, perhaps, which I shall never reach. But as even now my reason convinces me that I ought not the less carefully to withhold belief from what is not entirely certain and indubitable, then from what is manifestly false, it will be sufficient to justify the rejection of the whole. So, and that's a principle in logic, ultimately, isn't it? If I shall find in each some ground for doubt, if you have a kulliya mujiba, all you need is what? You just need one juz'iyya saliba to deny the entire kulliya mujiba. If someone gives you a universal affirmative, you just need to give one negative particular to destroy the entire thing. Now, for this purpose, it will be necessary even to deal with each belief individually. Let me get to the next bit. Then he says, hey, look at this. All that I have up to this moment accepted as possessed of the highest truth and certainty, I received either from or through the senses. I observed, however, that these sometimes misled us, and it is the part of prudence not to place absolute confidence in that by which we have even once been deceived. So he says, but it may be said perhaps that although the senses occasionally mislead us respecting minute objects and such as are so far removed from us as to be beyond the reach of close observation, there are yet many other of their informations, presentations of the truth of which it is manifestly impossible to doubt. And look what the example that he's going to give. And he's going to say, so if you were to deny them, it's like you're like a mad person. A mad person they think that they're kings. I mean, look at this line. He says, but how could I deny that I possess these hands and this body, and with all escape being classed with the persons in a state of insanity? By the way, do you want to hear some very eloquent English? With persons in a state of insanity, whose brains are so disordered and clouded by dark bilious vapors as to cause them pertinaciously to assert that they are monarchs when they are in the greatest poverty, or clothed in gold and purple when destitute of any covering, etc., 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 right? So he says, well, then look what he says. I can't deny that I got hands, and I'm by the fireplace, and he said, but as a human, I am in the habit of sleeping and representing to myself in dreams those same things, or even sometimes other less probable, which the insane think are presented to them in their waking moments. So a madman may think that he's a king when he's a pauper. And he says, you may think, well, that's madness. He says, but when you're in your dream, you can see yourself as a king. You're actually looking at your hands and they're filled with rings, for example, but you don't own any rings. Exactly the same. What was the next step? He used the dream. So he uses the exact same thing, which is, well, I dream as well. So how do I know it's the same? Let us suppose then that we are dreaming, and that all these particulars, namely the opening of the eyes, the motion of the head, the forth putting of the hands, are merely illusions. So how do you know? This is where he gives the answer. If you want to read this later, 6, where he gives a very good answer to this by saying that they're still linked to the imagery is still linked to something in reality. So he goes for the exact same, and then he later on comes again back to the idea where he says, well, there could be a demon that there's, I think it's like 0.9 or 10, a demon that can come along and make you even doubt your reason. And then he says, but there's God. In fact, I should have showed you that one bit. Let me just show you this here. 9. Nevertheless, the belief that there is a God who is all powerful and who created me, such as I am, has for a long time obtained steady possession of my mind. How then do I know that he has not arranged that there should be neither earth nor sky nor any extended thing, nor figure, nor magnitude, nor place providing at the same time? However, for the rise in me of the perceptions of all these objects and the persuasion that these do not exist otherwise than as I perceive them. So for him, and he's going to say this, well, the deity here, he says, what if he fooled me? What if the deity, the God has fooled me? Then he says, but perhaps deity has not been willing that I should be thus deceived, for he is said to be supremely good. See, that statement there, that's an assumption. He is said to be supremely good. If, however, it were repugnant to the goodness of deity to have created me subject to constant deception, it would seem likewise to be contrary to his goodness to allow me to be occasionally deceived. And yet it is clear that this is permitted. So if you look at the way that both of them begin their meditations, it's exactly the same. Same doubts, same ideas, except, as I said, for al-Ghazali, there's no kufr. Also, the doubt is in methodology, so they're same even in that really. But also, for al-Ghazali, there's no assumption. There's tahqiq and everybody can get to it. So they choose. For Descartes, he just has this assumption, but his assumption isn't just that there's a God. His assumption that God is good. Whereas Ghazali says, that God cast into me this nur, and I had absolutely no doubt in terms of my senses and my aql. So now I can accept the Quran and Sunnah, the Sharia, everything. It becomes clear as day to me. I can rely on all of that, but it comes through tahqiq. So I think that was the 17 lines. I think that went a little bit over. But what do you have to say? What do you have to say? No, it's you, someone. Let's start with you.
I mean, I would have said like let Shaji speak. I mean, obvious reasons. That's my position, that Shaji start for obvious reasons.
Shaji, okay, Bismillah. Okay, yes. Shaji, there you are. What would you like to say?
He's put me on the pedestal, has he?
He has put you on the pedestal.
Mare. What do I think? It's crazy, man. I mean, I've read the Munqidh in my own time, a long time ago. So I understood about. I think he uses the sundial as an example, doesn't he? About when, and he says that your senses can be betrayed because the shadow is actually moving, but you can't actually tell it's moving right away. So, but obviously you've opened up a massive under reading of everything that he said. So it's a lot more different than you understood that he had these doubts and these sort of stuff, but that doubt you never ever thought that it was based on any sort of kufr. But the bit about that he doubted the actual, I thought that the doubt was actually of the senses. I didn't know that he even doubted the rational thinking as well. So that I didn't know that. So that was really new to me. And the bit about the demon and actually somebody higher authority could be doubting you, that was very interesting as well. But yeah, I mean, yeah, a little bit overwhelmed.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, Shaji, for next lesson, this was the first, and I sent all of the information quite late. I think what we'll do for next lesson is you just read those lines, and then we just come back and discuss it. I think today I didn't know how much anybody would have read, and I didn't really want to put anyone on the spot. So I didn't kind of want to be like, what did you understand from the text? What did you understand from the text? Because I think I got it sent like a few hours ago. So although I know that all of you would have read the Munqidh anyway, but I couldn't make that assumption. So I prepared differently, like as if it's a lecture. But I think for next week I won't do that.
You see, I always thought that the rational principles was something that was always agreed on. Ilm Dharuri, right? Right. I thought that these were agreed on principles that were never to be questioned, because any sane thinking person would agree on these principles. Therefore, they have to be true because they're absolutes almost.
Yeah.
And that's what I understood by it. I didn't know that people actually, Imam Ghazali actually even questioned that.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't think you could question that.
Well, yeah, okay, that's a good point. Does anybody want to respond to what Shaji has mentioned? Your audio.
So, for example, let's say there is an absolute truth, which is the part is smaller than the whole. So, are you saying that Imam Ghazali he doubted this very principle that the part can be smaller than the whole? Because if you're able to show there's a problem with a juz of the kull, then just crumbles the kull. It's no longer a kulli principle. Is that what the premise is? And is that what
Yes,
Imam Ghazali is critiquing?
that's exactly what you're saying.
To be honest, I didn't feel like he's critiquing that. He's critiquing his more like sort of sense data, and based on that sense data, he's critiquing. Well, did you perceive it correctly? This is the word it does. So, well, did you even perceive it that this is a whole? Did you even perceive that correctly? Because your rationality is built upon your perception. Well, how did you even perceive it to be whole? That to be full, it needs sense data. So if you're doubting a sense data, you are in actuality doubting rationality by extension, because you don't even know what's true anymore.
Okay, that's a good point. I agree with you. But I think what he's trying to say is that even your principles of reason, he's saying that that are so clear to you and firm to you. His idea is that what if there is a higher thing, where he calls a judge, a reason judge, a higher one, that could actually make you doubt the reasoning, not doubt the perception of things.
Mm.
I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that he's saying, well, what reasoning can you do when you can't trust your senses? But there's things in your mind that you can reason with, right? Like the kul and the juz, it has nothing to do with the external world. It's all to do with its their kulliyat, aren't they? And so they're in your mind. But he's trying to say that, your aql, the reasoning it's doing, how do you know that those principles are truly sound? You can't, there's nothing, you can't go off the external world because you've doubted your senses. And so he's like, well, I can definitely trust my mind. And he goes, but then the senses, he's speaking allegorically, but the senses say, but what if there's something above that? And you've got some of the Sufis, they actually talked about in some of the maratib of wujud, they say that in some of the maratib, even the qawa'id mantaqiyya breakdown. They mentioned that. Allahu alam, right? They mentioned that. So what al-Ghazali tried to say is that I basically said, I don't know anything about anything, right? But what I do know is that the Sufis said, well, if you want clarity, so he took an assumption, if you want clarity, you have to take a path. He took that path and he realized that Allah created us in a fitrah to know. And so, but the fitrah gets spoiled. And so if I can free myself of that, and this is a very Sufi principle, which is the fayd of Allah Ta'ala is always pouring upon man. But we get, corrupted. And so what ends up happening is if it's polished, it can reflect the light of God, right? And so I know what you're trying to say, and you're right. And I'm not saying, and Shadi as well, unfortunately, I don't know what happened, but it's not to say we don't disagree on rational principles. Of course we don't. We don't disagree on them. Shadi, just to make this last point for you, is that we don't disagree on the rational principles. Nobody does. But what al-Ghazali did was he said, I'm going to go to the depths of doubt, And he said that anything that you say, there can be an argument for it. This is true in the story, whether it's true or false, Allahu Alam. But the story about Imam Razi, they said that when he was dying, Satan came to him and objected to the existence of God, and he gave him an answer. And then he gave him 99 answers for the existence of God until he saw he saw his sheikh, and his sheikh said to him, say to the shaitan that I believe in God without any of these evidences, right? Like even in the story, again, I'm not talking about whether it's true or false, but in the story is that what the Ghazali is saying is that what somebody has zawq of, what the experience at the level of the soul, the aql, the hawas and everything, are beneath that. That's why that they have. Now, I don't understand that. But the point is that, and this is why he gives the example of the dream. He actually used the word, where's the causality in dreams? Where's cause and effect in dreams? Yeah, you'd say causality is a rational principle. Yet in your dreams it's not there, but you're experiencing it. So could you experience a world without those rational principles? So what is experience now? What is the dhawq? What's tucked under this term dhawq? Like, you don't know unless you've taken the path, right? So Ghazali says, I had to take the path. And I found that the truth was within. Now, we have to just take what he says for granted, right? Unless there are people out there that are willing to take that path. For the rest of us, we just say, Imam said it, ala ra'si wa aini, that's what he said. So I do get your point, but that's what I would say, And by the way, can I say something else? This isn't like a call to doubt. No. That's not why he's writing the Munqidh. It's not a call to doubt that people should doubt. It is actually it's inspirational to know that you can go to the depth of the darkness of skepticism and come back out, but only through God. Only through God. That is real tawheed, isn't it? Really, if you think about it, it's absolute tawheed, which is even if my aql was to deceive me, and even if my senses were to deceive me, actually in the level of my soul consciousness, which is itself sir, it's a secret, and nobody can explain. Even the Quran says they ask you about the ruh, you've only been given the knowledge about it. What do you know about the ruh? These people, you get even Buddhists that will go into sort of meditative states and they will witness the entire universe conscious and breathing. Like, what do they, these are Buddhists that are stuck. They can never get, because of the absence of Iman. So what are they experiencing? That's what Ghazali is saying. So the Munqidh, you can put it into a genre of Sufism, you could put it into a genre of an autobiography, you could put it into a meditations or philosophy, you could put it into so many genres. It's just Imam Ghazali, you know. So that's what I would say about that.
Just comparing that
Yes.
with just comparing with Descartes, what he says at the end, because I think what he said is, it is said that God is all good. So he's using the word Qila, let's say. Let's call it Qila. He's saying Qila, God is good. And because God is all good, it must be that he guides me.
Hmm.
But
Or
there's a thing,
he doesn't allow me to be deceived.
deceive me, yeah. So I mean, by opposition, he has to guide me. I mean, that's like a more like a Mu'tazili thing, like he has to guide me. So wajib on God. But at last line, he says that um I have seen the opposite. Like God has deceived people, let's say. That was the last line in that thingy that we read. Yeah, so here it
Yeah.
is clear that this is permitted, like occasionally deceived. So I'm thinking like he's saying that God can deceive and my assumption is wrong. And so then
Yeah.
there's no absolute truth. Like there is no truth that you can reach. There's no haqq. There's no ayn yaqeen, there's no haqqul yaqeen, there's nothing. It's just like, I don't know, it's just skepticism. Because then nothing is true anymore. So that's I don't know if that's the right reading.
It is. But what he basically says there and later on is that despite basically God being good, that he can allow your senses to sometimes deceive you. Like when you get sick and something sweet tastes bitter, for example, or you can be feeling hot when it's actually cold, etc. And that's not taking anything away from God being good, because what you're saying is that generally our senses don't deceive us, and generally our reason doesn't deceive us. But the allowance of it sometimes doesn't take away from the fact that God is good, because later on he says, he affirms it and says, because God is good, and then he builds his entire foundation, his entire edifice on that foundation. That's why I said where it was a little bit different for him. He accepted the existence of God based upon an assumption. You know, now he might use different wording for it, but you're right, because he doesn't remain a skeptic. Descartes is a priest. Descartes is a Christian, and he dies as a Christian. So he's not like a radical skeptic. You know, he's like a skeptic that he's an epistemological skeptic. Yeah.
So it's more
You
like
know?
a polemical skeptic, let's say. So
Yeah,
like
but
Imam Ghazali does it, like he'll write a book on philosophers, he'll provide their points, and then he'll dismantle those points in another book. Is that the kind of philosopher he is?
yeah, he is, but he did actually go through the same problem. Like, he locked himself in his room, right? And he hunted up the windows, boarded them up. So and he just sat in the darkness for a long, long time. Like, I don't know, I can't remember whether it was weeks or months, but he sat in the darkness. It affected him a lot. So Descartes wasn't.
Like a muraqabah. Like a
Yes,
muraqabah. Yeah, okay.
like a muraqabah. And he was a brilliant mind, like Descartes. They don't call him the father of modern philosophy for no reason, right? But Descartes was a brilliant mind. But the point is that he did not let go of the concept of God exists. But why I call it an assumption is because he doesn't use the word God, cast a light into me and you can get it through Tahdhib al-Akhlaq. He doesn't do that. Secondly, it's because he says God is good. And that's an assumption. I mean, it's a Christian assumption. It's a Christian assumption. Whereas Ghazali, he has an Islamic conception, which is, oh, God exists. I know that, But how you have certainty in everything, and even your epistemology. Remember, not once did he say, by the way, can I say something? I doubted in my religion, and it's only Sufism that will give you certainty in your religion. He never said that. He said, it is Sufism that will give you the absolute knowledge of everything that you need to know as well. So not just of God.
So the highest level of ma'rifah, like let's in Bahr al-Kalam we read that, well, I mean, ilm is ma'rifah, let's say, and so the highest level of ma'rifah can only be reached through Sufism. Is that what he's trying to get
That's exactly what you're saying. And him and every other
Okay.
Sufi and Avicenna, Ibn Sina said the same thing. All of them said the same thing, that there is a broader epistemology that is employed by these people. And the interesting thing about it is they don't hide it. It's not like, oh, why does he hate the Batanis? Why does Ghazali hate with a passion the Batanis?
I mean, in Ayyuh al-Balad, he says because they hold on to their knowledge, but they never act upon it. And so that's why he says they are mustaghin al-amal. That's what he says in Ayyuh al-Balad.
That's true, because they don't have a Sharia, right? They're like you get these modern non-dualists, Shunyamurti, and people like that, they're fantastic. Like, they say some very interesting things, but like they don't have a deen, right? But in any case, why he hates the Batini so much is that, but also the fact that you can't get access to knowledge. You've just got to trust the infallible Imam. So Ghazali does not like that at all. See, what he's saying is you can do it. Okay, you don't trust me. You don't trust me, he's saying. Bismillah, tafaddal. Tafaddal. It's like it's accessible to you if you're willing to put in the effort. That's a da'wah on behalf of the Sufis. That their path is a path it's mujarrab, tried and tested. It's a trodden path. That's the argument. It's very different to take on. This is why I agreed. I agree when they said there's overlap. You can see it. You read it yourself today. I mean, I don't know if anybody's actually sat there and read those two texts side by side like that. But as you were reading that straight away, I'm sure you were sat there, if you haven't read the meditations, thinking, oh, I want to read this with this going along, because juxtaposing these two is going to be really interesting. But you can see where they depart as well. But yeah, all right, I think we're going to have to call it a day. It's been lovely seeing you. Like I said, what we're going to do, this is going to change a little bit for next lesson. So those listening to the recording as well, the next lines, it's on the, whatever it is, it's on the website as well. I'll send it to you in the group anyway. Just if you can, it's a week. So read those lines. I'll send you some additional reading material as well. Well, read it properly, like study it. It's only a few lines. I get it, Shadi, what you're saying. I know. Today was a little bit, because I lectured it, and that I did not want to do that today. But I just didn't know how much time you had to read it. But read the next lines over the week, like study it. Really think about what he's saying. Like sit down with it. What does he mean? If you can read the meditations, read the meditations. If you've got questions, write them down. What we can even do is put those questions in the group beforehand, and then we can all sit there and think about them, and then we'll come back and I'll give like a synopsis or something, and then we'll have like a conversation. What do you reckon? The reason being, I'll tell you, because Dr. Ali Omari, my Shaykh, one of the things that he said that was wonderful, when we read the Iqtisad to him, he said that the Muqaddimah, Ghazali, I don't know if you read the Muqaddimah of the Iqtisad. It's been translated to English, it's down Arabic. He said, if you didn't read the rest of the book, which itself is brilliant, and you just read the Muqaddimah, it's worthy of being studied on its own, because it gives you the mindset of a mutakallim. Ghazali is amazing. The Munqidh is similar in that it takes you on a journey of how do you look at all these groups? How do you understand, like the next lesson or the session, it's going to be on the different groups, the hukama. So who are they? So you're going to want to get started. Who really are the hukama? What were their beliefs? He goes into all of these things, very, very subtly, and he exposes their false beliefs, and he highlights where they were correct. And he's going to mention some things, like he's going to talk about, you're going to see them alive in your own life around you, like how what you should study with people and what you shouldn't study. There's little things like that he mentions. Like, for example, he says mathematics is good. Anyone that says it isn't good, they're lying to you. But some people look at these mathematicians and they're so impressed by them that they think, well, how could they have got religion wrong? They're so clever. Isn't that true? That's exactly what happens. People look at it and they think, it's like a hood boy in Pakistan is probably a prime example of this. That was somebody, no doubt, who woke up one day and said, these guys are really clever, the academics. These academics are so clever. Look at them in their beautiful suits, and they're so smart, and they're so articulate, and and he was just like, yeah, this is all right. because it's just based upon image. It was an emotional reason to fall for them or not, or their way or not, etc. He talks about all of this. So it'd be nice for you to have a read of it beforehand, inshallah. With that, inshallah, it's lovely seeing you guys all again. And mashallah, make dua for us, inshallah. Have a lovely week. And I'll see you guys next week, inshallah. We'll finish with al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين اللهم اغفر لنا يا رب العالمين اللهم تقبل منا هذا يا رب العالمين واجعله نورا لنا في الدنيا والآخرة يا رب العالمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا اللهم سهل أمور المسلمين يا رب العالمين في فلسطين وفي جميع بلاد المسلمين يا أرحم الراحمين وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. طيب take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay, so-
Very good.